Welcome back to the Ease into Retirement podcast. I'm Tom Mosley, your host. And if you'll give me up to 15 minutes, I promise to do my best to build your financial knowledge. The reason I hesitated a little bit there is I want to do several things. I want to build value into the time that you're spending listening to this. I want it to be important. And number two, I want to educate you. We are on podcast number 31. And we are in a series called the Potholes of Retirement. You know, like going down a road, if you're not careful, you're driving, you hit a pothole. It sometimes causes immediate damage, but more often than not, it just begins to wear and tear on the suspension and the alignment of your car and the tires. And before you know it, you've got a lot of expense and you've cost yourself a lot of money because you hit that pothole. Well, that's what these podcasts are about. This is episode 2 of a series of 7. And our theme is this: the damage from potential potholes in your retirement plan can be prevented if you do proper planning. You can prevent it if you do proper planning. Now, last week we talked about a couple of potholes, and today we're going to talk about pothole number 3 and pothole number 4. Let's get started. Pothole number 3. Inflation normally takes a bigger bite than you think. And if you're not careful, that can be a pothole that you hit. You know, I heard a little funny the other day about inflation and trying to explain it. It said inflation is where you just paid $15 for a $10 haircut that you used to pay $5 for. So if you're going through that, then you know exactly what inflation is. And there's some amazing statistics that are out there on inflation. Fidelity did a statistic recently, and you can actually do this on your calculator. You don't have to listen to Fidelity, but if you need $6,000 a year, $6,000 a month, or $72,000 a year, and you say, well, I don't know if I need quite that much, maybe only 5. All right, but think about it, because last week, one of the potholes we talked about was taxes. So if you need $5,000 spending money net, you're probably going to have to take out maybe according to your situation, you might have to take out $6,000 to net $5,000. So if you need $6,000 a month, that's $72,000 a year. Now, if you trace that for 20 years, which most of you plan on a 20-year retirement at least. Some of you are going to have 25, 30, maybe even 35 years of retirement that you're going to have to live off of your income. And we're talking about the pothole of inflation. If you trace inflation from $6,000 a month for 20 years at 3% inflation, then you're going to need, instead of $72,000, you're going to need to cover and buy the same amount of material or things or whatever. You're going to need, instead of $72,000 a year, you're going to need to be taking out $130,040 a year at 3% simple inflation. So you've got a plan for it. I also saw some illustrations that at 3% inflation, and you can calculate these out as well. If you go buy a car, it's not unusual in our day and time for you to spend $50,000 on a good automobile. At 3% inflation, if you have 3% inflation over 10 years and you keep a car for 10 years, you're going to buy another car most likely. In 10 years, the car that cost you $50,000 right now is going to cost you $67,196. And you say, well, I keep my cars for 20 years. Well, if you keep your car for 20 years, you bought it for $50,000 right now. In 20 years, at 3% inflation, you're going to have to spend $90,306 to buy the same $50,000 worth of value that you can get right now. A lot of people are so afraid of money. They say, well, I want to take the risk out of my money. I want to bury it. My father, when he passed away in 2014, shortly before he passed away, and it was taken out of the safety deposit box, my father had $92,000 in $100 bills in a brown paper sack in a safety deposit box because my dad didn't want to lose anything. Well, my dad passed away, so he really didn't lose anything. But if you put $1 million and you just put it in a brown paper sack and you just spend the money when you need it, in 5 years, it's all at 3% inflation. It's only going to buy what today 860,000 would buy. And in 10 years, it's only going to buy what today $740,000 would buy. And in 15 years, that drops to 640. And if you bury $1 million and dig it up in 20 years, it'll only buy $550,000 worth of today's value in things if you want to go buy something.
Hey folks, thank you for listening to today's episode of the Ease into Retirement podcast with Tom Mosley. Just a quick reminder that if anything you've heard so far today has hit home for you, maybe it's something you're dealing with, maybe it's just something you want to learn a little bit more about, there will be a complimentary downloadable giveaway on Tom's website, specifically prepared for this week's episode that you should check out. Just go to easepodcast.com. That's EASE podcast.com. Click the button with the title of this week's episode and get your copy today. Now I'll throw it back to Tom.
So you've got to account for inflation. It's got to be something that's built into your plan. How do you prevent the damage? Well, you look for investments that as things inflate, as inflation weighs on things in general, those investments are generally going to grow. And on the investment side of your portfolio, that normally would be equities or things. For instance, if you buy stock and inflation begins to hit and begins to make a bigger impact than a 3%. I mean, we're told at the time I'm making this podcast, I don't know when you're listening to it, but we're told in 2021, inflation may be as high as 5 or 6%. There was a news article last week that said maybe Social Security will go up 6% this year because of inflation and the way it's hitting. Well, if you're in equities, if you're in things, if you bought stock, if you bought mutual funds, the thought is, no promises, nothing guaranteed, but the thought is those equities will rise in value along with inflation. Real estate is another position that normally when inflation begins to run wild, the price of housing generally goes up along with it. It's a position to help you continue to grow with inflation. Now, the numbers I gave you on growing a portfolio and needing at 3% inflation, you say, well, if I lose purchasing power to those numbers, or if cars cost more and more and more, or if instead of needing $72,000 a year, I need $130,000, what happens if inflation goes to an average of 6%? Well, exactly. That's why you can't afford to bury the money, or you'll lose purchasing power faster and faster and faster. So one of the potholes, number 3, is inflation usually takes a bigger bite than you think out of your retirement plan, and particularly your income flow. So you need to prevent the damage by keeping yourself invested in equities and stock and mutual funds and real estate, which generally, no promises, but generally move along with inflation and grow with inflation. Remember, it's a great time to remind you that no statement I make on here, nothing I say is necessarily for you to take and run the ball with it as investment, tax, legal advice, or even gardening advice, okay? I'm growing tomatoes really well right now, but the rats are going to be into them very long because they'll find them. So I'm not one to go write a book on gardening. So you need to make sure that if you're going to get particular advice, your advice needs to come from somebody like we do with the people that work with us, where we consider your particular situation. And if you're working with somebody else, they need to consider your particular situation before you act on any of the recommendations that we make on this podcast. All right, pothole number 4. You might outlive your savings. It's a very real possibility, particularly if you leave it invested in the market, because the market not only has its rises generally when inflation goes up. We just talked about that equities go up, securities, mutual funds, stocks usually go up when inflation goes up. But the market also has its downturns. In the years 2000 to 2002, if you look at that overall picture, the market went down over 40%. You say, that's bad. Well, in 2007, from September until March of 2009, during that 18-month period, the market went down almost 54%. So if you're in the market and you're depending on your savings and all of your investments are invested in the stock market, the risk you run is when the market goes down 50%, if you're taking all the risk of the market, you've got half of the pot to draw your money from. But guess what? You probably need about the same amount of money. So in essence, unit-wise, you're taking out about twice as much when the market value goes down to 50%. So you deplete your assets faster and faster and faster. So you literally, pothole number 4, you might outlive your savings if they're all invested in the market. You say, how do we prevent the damage? Well, there are ways that you can secure your income for life, and you can match your portfolios to your risk. Now, a lot of people, they're used to accumulating. They're used to growth. They retire and they come in for a strategy session in the first year. And we used to call those reviews, but reviews look backwards. And, what did I make this year? Well, a bigger question for you in retirement is not how much did I make, but how much is my money going to last? And is it going to last as long as we do? And if you're married, is it going to last? Are you going to have enough income? And is it going to last as the two of you? And if you are married, is it going to last as long as just the one of you is alive? And if you're single, is it going to last as long as you're alive? So is the money going to last? You might outlive your savings if it's all left at risk. There are ways through products that are called fixed indexed annuities. And many of you who work with us have chosen to go that route to secure all or a portion of your income so that you have secure, and with the ones that we use, increasing income for as long as you live, or if you're married, for as long as both of you live, you're going to have that portion of your savings guaranteed, set aside, secure for income as long as you live, because you've passed that risk along to the insurance company. So that is something that if you've never addressed it, you really need to take a look at it and say, would those be for me? You can put your income bucket into something really secure, but it's probably not going to keep up with inflation, and the purchasing power is going to diminish over a period of time. Or you can put yourself into something that is insured, that's going to be guaranteed to be there for as long as you live, as long as both of you live if you're married, and it's never going to go away. Those are the kind of things that you have as options to overcome and to prevent the damage of pothole number 4, which is you might outlive your savings. Hey, listen, I hope you're gaining something from this. We'll be back next week with 2 more potholes as we look at the potholes of retirement. And I want you to do this. If you like this, or you know somebody who needs this, forward this podcast along. Encourage somebody to listen to it. Subscribe to it if you like it, so you'll get a reminder of it every single week, and you'll know that it popped up there. If you're like me, you like something one time, but you forget that it comes out every single Thursday. And so I'll be back next Thursday with the Ease into Retirement podcast. And until then, I'm Tom Mosley, your host, and you give me 15 minutes, or today less than 14 minutes, and I promise I'll do my best to build your financial knowledge. I'll see you next week.
Investment advisory services offered only by duly registered individuals through AE Wealth Management, LLC. AE Wealth Management and Mosley Insurance and Financial Services are not affiliated companies. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Any references to protection, safety, or lifetime income generally refer to fixed insurance products, never securities or investments. Insurance guarantees are backed by the financial strength and claims-paying abilities of the issuing carrier. This podcast is intended for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as the sole basis for financial decisions, nor should it be construed as advice designed to meet the particular needs of an individual's situation. Mosley Insurance and Financial Services is not permitted to offer, and no statement made during this show shall constitute tax or legal advice. Our firm is not affiliated with or endorsed by the U.S. government or any governmental agency. The information and opinions contained herein provided by third parties have been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed by Mosley Insurance and Financial Services. Ed Slott's IRA Advisor Group is a paid membership educational organization comprised of professionals of varying credentials. Membership in this organization does not imply a set level of skill or training. The logo and or service mark is the property of their respective owners, and no endorsement of Tom Mosley is stated or implied.
A Roth conversion is a taxable event and may have several tax-related consequences. Be sure to consult with a qualified tax advisor before making any decisions regarding your IRA.